This is the Gospel Revolution.
Since you're knocking on the door, you're begging to come in, yeah. Unaware that all the while love's been knocking from within. You are the love you see, a perfect yet unique, righteous, holy.
Here's the founder and president of the Gospel Revolution, Michael Lilbourne Williams.
I'm wondering what it would be if I was only the founder and not the president. Or what if I was the president and not the founder?
Wow, you are starting off with some hard questions.
What if I was just nobody?
Ooh, just little old Mikey.
Oh, no. Believe me, there are times it's like, please, I'm Mikey. Leave me alone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, Daniel. And to all of our listeners, thank you guys for joining us. I know that everybody braces for how this is going to start. We do too, actually, because we never know. One would think that this is coming across so eloquently at the start that we get together and plan how we're going to do this. But boy, it's just spirit inspired. That's all we can say.
We hit the record button and go.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. So Daniel, we have been, wow. I don't know what to say, but wow. And
Yeah.
wow just went wow on steroids over this weekend. And we now know, we can tell you that we have. And by the time you get to this one, this is going to be number 16.
Yep.
And by the time you get to this one, we will be having to cover ground on the 1,000-year reign of Christ. We will have, it will be necessary even to get what we now know. We will have to do at least 20 full sessions on this.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be many, many more.
Yeah. Well, see, I don't like putting myself out there like that. So I don't like expectations on me, Dan.
Well, and I've got some ideas I haven't even shared with you
Oh,
yet.
dear Lord. Please keep it to yourself for a little while.
Because, Michael, as we were talking the other day, we got to go through Revelation again. And that might be 20 episodes right there.
Well, it because what we've been doing in the shadows is going back and saying, wow, I wonder how that relates to what we taught here or there, and especially the Revelation. And we just laugh out loud when we look at something. We were looking at something in a Revelation, and it was talking about a particular part of it, and it was describing these days and how many days there's going to be these days, and then this days, and then it was going to be 40 of these days. And so I said, Daniel, what is 40 times whatever it was? And he just chuckled out loud, and he said, it's 3.5 years. So, and I don't know, people may be chuckling at us because everybody's known all this stuff all this time, but we did not. And I'm actually glad that we're learning as we go, because if you've heard all of this stuff before, you probably have it neatly tucked away within some type of futuristic doctrine. And so we are convinced. First off, let's give you where the Gospel Revolution has come from, where it's going. So this history will take about 20 hours in itself. So, but no, our entire focus is on the Tetelestai, the finished work of the cross. I was catching my daughter up, who's visiting with my grandson this weekend. And so I was giving her the framework of the 1,000-year reign. She said, wow. She says, Dad says, it just seems like this statement that Jesus made when he died on the cross, it is finished, that it means it's finished.
Yeah, come on.
And I thought, well, that's exactly what we need everybody to understand. And of course, I told her about Tetelestai, and And of course, father has to sound wise. So I telestized my daughter. I finished her. I don't know what that means. I finished her doctrine out, I guess. But anyway, we had a really fun time talking, and I can tell when she's listening and when she's not. Do you know that about your girls too, dog?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, you know.
And they check out.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you might as well be talking to the wall. But when they are listening, it's like, little sponges. And here, my daughter is going on 40, and we still have that same relationship. Sometimes it's just dad talking, So, but then there's times she knows that she needs to stop and listen. So we just still have those times. But we are looking at Tetelestai. It is finished, and one of my big struggles, and I think I've passed that struggle on to others, is that we were absolutely, completely convinced about the culmination of all things, biblical, scriptural, law, righteousness, sin, all the topics that are taught on, that something about them in all subjects was finished at the cross. The issue of righteousness was finished at the cross. The issue of sin was finished at the cross. The issue of the 1,000-year reign was finished at the cross. The issue of the 70 weeks of Daniel was finished at the cross. The issue of the little horn was finished at the cross.
Little horn?
Little horn? Little big horn? No, we're talking about the little horn. That's what you're going to learn about today.
The little horn.
The little witty horn.
Michael, as you're talking about that, I think about even in the Bible, we have to, I guess, give Christianity a little credit in the fact that some of their doctrine is in the Bible. Peter.
Okay.
Peter, James, and John taught a futuristic unfolding of prophetic events. Jesus taught that history was being unfolded before their very eyes. Mm-hmm. And when he hung on the cross, it finished.
Yeah.
And then Paul came behind and he taught history as being finished, the history of the prophets, so the history of the law, the history of all the eschatological teaching, that was all finished. But there are some writers in the New Testament who do paint the picture of a futuristic.
And the reason they believe it is because it's in the Bible. And that was... that's a real important thing to realize, is that just because it's out of context doesn't mean it's not in the Bible. And even in context, I think that those of us who understand the gospel and those who don't, you have to, for those that don't understand the gospel of grace and peace, they have to read Peter, James, and John out of context, or they have to read Paul out of context. You've got to read somebody out of context. It is really weird once you let these guys speak for themselves in the context of the subject they're speaking about.
Right.
We'll be starting out this show that way. And you're going to learn some things that most likely you did not know. I'll guarantee you that the subject, because we've already asked who teaches on this as this, and now we did find out that, but it's so scarce, we have a list that teaches this as a future event of teachers. Oh my gosh. I would have to say all that anybody knows, even founding fathers, all the way through the 100, 200 year ago revivals and things that took place, and right through the guys that are on TV today, teach about this, the little horn. I didn't know there was a little horn. And so but this is one of the supportive doctrines that eschews the 1,000-year reign, because they place this outside of, they place it as a futuristic event.
So another term that they associate the little horn with is a term that's only used 4 times in the Bible, and that is the term the Antichrist.
And what an interesting place that it is. So, Daniel, where do we find the term Antichrist? How many authors and writers in the New Testament spoke about the Antichrist?
There is only one.
Wow. And which one is that? Drum roll.
That is the Elder John.
The Elder John. And that is correct. Goodness gracious. I think it's listed in 1st and 2nd John.
Yep.
About this Antichrist. And then there are many supportive doctrines to explain the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've already, Daniel, is there a way that we can share a list of things that people teach on that say that inside this teaching is supportive of this future coming Antichrist?
Yeah, I'll give you some terms that are used. In the Hebrew scriptures, you mentioned the one already, the little horn. That's out of Daniel chapter 7 and 8. Daniel chapter 9 talks about the prince who is to come. Daniel chapter 11 calls for the king of the north. And Zechariah prophesies about the worthless shepherd. And then in the New Testament, Michael, a couple of the ones that we have already addressed is the man of sin or the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians.
Mm-hmm.
Also referred to as the son of perdition. It's actually the same references. It just depends on which Bible translation you're reading from.
Isn't that something?
But that also relates to the story that's associated with Judas Iscariot in John 17. And then, of course, in the Revelation chapter 13, you have the beast and you have the false prophet. And then the other one that we dealt with here in the last couple of weeks, Michael, was the abomination of desolation, as again referred to in Daniel 9, Daniel 11, and Matthew 24.
Okay, so how many doctrines is that?
So that would be 4 in the Hebrew scriptures. And if we put the man of sin and the son of perdition together, because they are the same, that would only be 4 in the New Testament as well.
So 8 altogether.
Correct.
4 Old Testament, 4 New Testament, where they teach from these portions of Scripture and New Testament to explain the Antichrist,
right,
as a future event. Now, the first thing that, of course, grabs our attention is how can this be a future event?
Mm-hmm. Right.
What we've done so far without knowing it is that we've taken, if you saw this as an 8-leg table, right?
Right.
So that'd be like a big table, right?
Yeah.
So you got 8-leg table, and the surface of this would be the Antichrist.
Mm.
So what we have done is we've reached under this table, and it now has only 6 legs left because we took 2 of the legs away.
Right.
And those 2 that we took away are the man of sin or the lawlessness, those that you've described as, just depends on which translation you're looking at or which letter you're looking at. It's all referring to the same, contextually the same person. And also the abomination that maketh desolate, standing in the holy place.
Mm-hmm.
Those are 2 of the 8 legs to this table. And we've made it, I think, very clear. Go back and just start picturing this concept in your mind of an 8-legged table. And so we are but where we're going to start, we've already taken away 2 legs. I've said that 3 times. I need to just stop saying it over and over. We've taken 2 legs away from this 8-legged table. And so it's down to 6. But when we started looking into this even deeper, we decided to look at the tabletop, actually.
Right.
And see if it was holding something credible, something real, or have these doctrines been taken, number one, out of context? We know 2 of them that have been taken out of context. And but if they're taken out of context, what if we find out the same things about the other 6 supportive doctrines of this issue of the Antichrist? So Daniel thought it would be a good idea to go back and just question about the contextual reality or not of a person, a man called the Antichrist. Now, the reason the Antichrist has turned into a single man is because these prophecies that we've told you about are about a single person.
Right.
All 8 of them are about a single person. That is then they are implying that this single person is the Antichrist. So we need to go first and look at the Antichrist we only have one person to tell us what he thinks about the Antichrist, because there's only one person who taught it. I want to also point out to you that this teacher, correct or incorrect about this, he certainly has created, knowingly or unknowingly, wittingly or unwittingly, he has created the 2 most popular doctrines in all of the Christian world. And the number 1, of course, is forgiveness of sin on this side of the cross. Wow. It's wonderful to begin to see people beginning to understand that the subject of sin is over. It died at the cross. There's actually quite a few ministries now around the world, and there were none, but there are quite a few around the world now that do teach that sin is a finished issue. The other thing that this writer in 1 John left the world with, like I said, wittingly or unwittingly, we're going to look and see what he actually says about the Antichrist. But it's probably the next most popular subject in the Christian world. That if you ask about somebody asking forgiveness, they'd know exactly what you were talking about. And if you ask somebody about the Antichrist, they would know there's this man that's coming that is, they don't know who he is. Some of them don't know if he's already got here. But all of them would be teaching at least over 95% of, gosh, we'd have to go to 99 to find any ministries that say that this manifestation of this was before the cross, or this is a non-issue. John taught about confession of sin, and we found out it's a non-issue. So we're going to look into this term Antichrist, talked about by the same writer who created this kerfuffle about this term, and see if people have built 8 doctrines to support a real truth or an illusion.
So the first time that it's mentioned in 1 John is 1 John 2 and verse 18. And it said, "Children, it is the last hour, and you have heard that Antichrist is coming. So now many Antichrists have come. Therefore we know that it is the last hour." And then if we keep reading, Michael, the next one that's used is verse 22. So I'll just read down right through to verse 22. "They went out from us." They, who are they? These Antichrist went out from us, for they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out, that they might be made manifest, that none of them were of us. But you have an anointing from the Holy One, and you know all things. I have not written to you because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and that no lie is of the truth. Who is a liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist, who denies the Father and the Son. Whoever denies the Son does not have the Father either. He who acknowledges the Son has the Father also.
Well, this is very fascinating. So let's look at the obvious elements involved in this statement about the Antichrist. I think the first thing we learn is that the writer, John, has said that there's been a whole lot of them up until this writing.
Yeah.
So we're within the first 2 or 3 decades after the cross. And the writer who speaks about the Antichrist says we've had a whole bunch of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he also says that these Antichrist people, so far not an individual, these Antichrist people used to be a part of them, but now they are not. And because if they'd ever really been a part, which you've heard this with every church breakup ever, if they had ever been really a part of us, they'd have never left in the first place.
Right.
You know, God's pruning the tree. You know, my gosh, everybody gets pruned. You know, and everybody that leaves is, they're just Antichrist, and people do. Everybody that leaves the church gets called Antichrist or a Christian denomination. You can't leave the church. Now, I'm hoping I'm hoping that when I misstate, that me correcting myself is going to linger longer than if I'd have said it right the first place, because we're going to have to hear ourselves and correct ourselves. The church is the body of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing wrong with the body of Christ. It's not broken. It's not sick. It's not ailing. There's not a cancer on the body of Christ, as Jimmy Swaggart declared about Jim and Tammy Faye. None of that's true. Now, all of that's true about Christianity, but Christianity is a religion. The church is not a religion.
Yeah.
The church is the body of Christ. So anytime that I misstate this or Daniel misstates it, he and I will correct each other, because we want this to be a legacy of the gospel revolution, as that we have made it clear the difference between the church and Christianity. We will never criticize the church. If you hear us make a criticism of the church, you will know we have misstated. And we meant to say Christianity. So until we get our vocabulary straightened out perfectly, catch us on that. Call us on it. Let us know. I mean, send us an email. Let us know. Caught you. Because we want to get caught, because we want this to be. Daniel, how important do you see that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because those are the words that get us caught up. And if we are trying to paint the picture that the church is perfect, and we correlate the church to Christianity, we're going to see very quickly that is not perfect.
Yeah, something's rotten in Denmark, in Kansas, and other places. So it's very vitally important that you correct us, we correct ourselves from saying church when we're talking something that is negative about what's being taught. It's being taught by Christianity. The church doesn't teach anything. The church is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good statement, Daniel. I don't know if you caught that or not. The church doesn't teach anything.
Mm-hmm.
The church is the thing.
Yeah.
So, and that's settled and done. The church teaches this, and the church doesn't teach anything. Christianity teaches stuff. Buddhism teaches stuff. But the church teaches nothing. It is a manifestation, the mystery. There's a mystery about it. That, boy, once you see the church, you see what it is. But it itself doesn't teach anything. So we have that this term Antichrist is not a single person yet. We're going to find out because everybody's waiting for the Antichrist, right? Based on, now we have to say that so far, as we can tell, the only thing that makes the Antichrist an individual person is 8 other doctrines. All right. So he said that they were among us. I remember trying to research this. I thought he was talking about Paul because there's, the issues between Paul and Peter, James, and John are very clear.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that you can't get around, I could not get around on that, was that they refused to declare that Jesus is the Christ and that he's come in the flesh. Now, unless they had some weird perception of what Paul was saying, that just is not possible, because Paul never said anything about Jesus not coming in the flesh. In fact, that's what his whole preaching and teaching was about. So whoever this was, but it makes you wonder, how in the world did they become a part of Christianity at that time? I mean, how could they be a part and have never ever admitted that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh? What kind of foundation of teaching were they presenting that would have welcomed or made feel welcome people who didn't even profess that Jesus Christ had come in the flesh?
I would just guess, Michael, that maybe it has something to do with the Jewish people, in that John was, as we saw with Peter, he was always addressing the Jewish people,
right,
and welcome that message to welcome them in. But there were certainly many Jews who did not accept that Jesus was the Christ.
So that gives us context to see why they would have been there. It's because they were all Jews. So, these guys did emphasize the Jewish population of their Christian group. The one thing that we could say then definitively about my suspicions in past years of thinking, I wonder if that's Paul. I guess I can stop wondering then, right?
Yeah.
It's just not possible. Like I say, unless they perceived something about Paul and the people that followed Paul having a belief that they perceived was this, because we do know that that Peter did talk about Paul and the people who followed him, but he didn't talk about the people following Paul not professing that Jesus had come in the flesh. He was talking about them being dumb bunnies and not able to understand all those other scriptures.
Dumb bunnies?
Yeah, that's a scriptural term, biblical term we're trying to revive. So that's where we are so far. Now, keep me on track here. We've got them as we've got Antichrist as a them. We've got them being there, and we got them separating from this congregation. What else do we have about so far them? So tell me where he, the Antichrist, is in 1 John.
He's not.
What?
No. So here's the next one. 1 John 4:3. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard was coming and now is in the world already.
So now we know we have it not just as a group of people that were around, and they were a part of John's group, whatever group he was a part of. And now we've got it down to the term Antichrist being a spirit. And that spirit is defined by people who do not profess that Jesus has come in the flesh.
Yeah, and if you look at verse 1 of chapter 4, he says, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." So I think we can associate that spirit of the Antichrist is these false prophets.
What they would perceive false prophets, which if they were not professing that Jesus was the Christ, then of course they were false prophets.
Right, exactly.
And we just can't even know. There's no way we can imagine. We're not going to add to a story that already has an awful lot of misinformation about it. We're not going to add to the misinformation about something that we don't know. So I've corrected myself. They're not talking about Paul. It is a number of people, and they left this group. It doesn't say that they ran them off. It says they left, and the reason they did is because they weren't part of us anyway. And how many churches how many groups of Christianity have you been in that has somebody's left and the preacher stood up and said, yeah, we would need to let you know that elder so-and-so has separated himself from us, and then they read this verse and said that if they had been a part of us, they wouldn't have left us in the first place.
Yeah.
Did you ever do that, Daniel?
I never did it. No,
I did.
I was too graceful.
Oh man, it was a glorious day for me. They were not a part of us in the first place. So.
Yeah. Now, it has happened in the church, but it was never for me.
Not for you. Well, you're just too nice. You were too nice to be a Christian.
Yep.
How about that?
That's why I ain't one.
Yep, exactly. Amongst other reasons, good, valid reasons, right?
Yep.
So, are you telling me that is all there is about the Antichrist?
Well, there's one more.
Okay.
And that's 1 John. So now this is 2 John. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, many, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is a deceiver and the Antichrist.
All right, I have one question about this one, and that is, he's talking about Jesus Christ coming in the flesh. See, a lot of people put this as a second coming, but according to the context of this, he's saying that these people never believed that the Christ, when he showed up in the flesh, that wasn't him.
Right. Yeah.
He's not making a reference to Jesus is coming back in the flesh.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly.
And there are Christian denominations that take that and say that Jesus is having a physical return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they totally read into that. I mean, this is actually Jesus being in the flesh, crucified before your very eyes, the thing that Paul taught.
3-year ministry, carpenter's son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Michael, in these four, the only association that I see with a future thing is what he said in 1 John 2:18, is that it's the last hour. But it's interesting that John is writing 2,000 years ago, saying it is the last hour. The Antichrist is coming. Oh, wait, there are already Antichrists who've already come. Therefore, we know that this is the last hour. So he's saying the sign of the last hour is that there's going to be an Antichrist. Oh, but wait, we already see there are Antichrists, so we know we're in the last hour. And that was their perception, was that they were living in the last days. And Michael, this is where the 80-70 comes in, is because these guys are saying, see, these guys who are writing, Peter, James, and John, they wrote that all this stuff was about to happen. Yeah. And but they already missed, as we opened up the show with earlier, Peter, James, and John missed that history had already taken place, because Jesus had already said, I'm showing you the history. I am the history. Yeah. I'm going to finish it. So that's the only association I see possibly in any of these verses that show of a future Antichrist, is only that it associates it with the last days or the last hour. And then you have to define the last hour as being something that's yet to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, the only definition we have here of the Antichrist is a person who denies that Jesus came in the flesh.
So then, for clarification, then our 70 AD friends, and many of them are very dear friends of ours, because of what the disciples, and specifically Peter, James, and the elder John, we don't know that he was a disciple. Nobody knows who this guy is. His writings are not reflective of the book of John. His writings are not reflective of the Revelation. So we know it wasn't him. You can ask any, there's actually available language comparisons now that will go in and compare it and tell you these are similar, or these are the same author, or this can't possibly, and that's just AI can do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason, like you said, the reason that Christians have these doctrines is because they are there in the Bible somewhere.
Yeah.
So this doctrine is in the Bible, but I think the thing that is failed to recognize is that the disciples themselves did not understand the totality of tetelestai.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were still, as we have spoken of in depth, still looking for a physical kingdom to come. And even when Peter acknowledged about being kings and priests unto our God, he was talking strictly to the Jews and about this new kingdom that was coming.
Mm.
And that they were going to set up this brand new kingdom, and these Jewish believers were going to be in charge of it.
Now, Michael, everything that I was taught about the Antichrist in my evangelical upbringing is not told in 1 John. I was taught about a single man who is going to be some sort of world leader, a king, a world leader. He was going to be very charismatic. He was going to persuade many Christians that Jesus was not the Christ. He was going to do exactly, that's the only thing here that would tie these two together, is that he would teach that Jesus was not the Christ. And he was going to have some sort of power, some sort of demonic, satanic power over people. And he could do miracles, or as the Bible terms would say, lying signs and wonders. And this would ultimately lead to him putting together a army that would come against, and that they would fight the Great War of Armageddon. And that would be led by the Antichrist. Now, Michael, as we look at those 4 verses, I see none of that.
There's
none of that.
Boy, you talk about a fabrication. So the 8 legs of this table are the only thing that hold up the fictitious table.
Mm-hmm.
Because this table doesn't exist. If it's holding up the table of the individual, the person, the Antichrist, which that's what it says, that's the way you were taught, that's the way this is taught, is that these 8 separate doctrines validate and support this term Antichrist. And what we've looked at here, there is no single person Antichrist, described by the very writer who used the term.
Yeah, the only place in the Bible that uses this term.
Only place.
So, Michael, as I was saying, that there was a lot about the Antichrist that I was taught being raised in evangelical Christianity. And, you know, I was also brought up during the time of the Left Behind series.
Left Your Behind behind, right?
That was Tim LaHaye, I believe, was the author of those. And goodness, my mom, she read the adult version, and then my parents bought me, there was a kid version.
I knew there was an adult version. Left Your Behind behind.
But Tim LaHaye, I guess he would be one of these guys who taught much about, he declared that this little horn would have been the Antichrist. But goodness, I know that there are many, many others who have declared make the same declaration.
Well, I think it would be important, Daniel, before we go into this, to show why this became one of the legs of this table. It has nothing to do. Let us assure you that this little horn has nothing to do with the Antichrist. There is no connection whatsoever to even what the definition of the Antichrist is. As we go down through it, you see what what First John tells us it's not, more than we find out what it is. So that's just really kind of shocking to see that, Daniel, as we go down through that. But it is important that we identify why this has become such a big deal. Who found the little horn, and who decided to make a big deal out of the little horn? The little horn was not a subject at all about the Antichrist until Martin Luther came along. He's the first one that we can find who gave a definition to that, and he found this little horn to be the Pope. So I'm not sure that he was calling it the Antichrist, but this little horn, I know, and other teachers, of course, do declare it to be the Antichrist, but the papacy is what a lot of them identified the little horn as. And we got John Calvin did the same thing as Luther, and saw it as a representation of the papacy, likening it to the rise of false religious authority. So I guess that's how they connected it to the term Antichrist. John Wesley, he echoed exactly what the Protestant Reformation perspective and association with the little horn with the papacy also. The guy, William Miller, they called him Millerites. I thought it was Miller Lite at first, but and they saw that symbol also as the papacy, the Roman Catholic Church. And then the Seventh-day Adventist, Ellen White, was a prophetess with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and she also agreed with them that the little horn was the papacy in opposition to Christ's high priestly ministry. So all of that saying that there was something happening at that time. I mean, when they were teaching this, they were saying that the Catholic Church at that time, and I remember now after going through this, hearing people say that the Catholic Church was the Antichrist, that the Pope was the Antichrist, that Catholicism was Antichrist in and of itself. But it's just things that I heard from here and there. I never sat through a teaching session of one of our mentors that you and I both had. And then the futurist representation. Daniel, we have some of those guys that we have been able to find. What did we find here on the ones that are teaching that this is the Antichrist of the future?
Well, of course, there's three names that come to mind, and I remember going through these guys' books and their teachings at my time during Rhema, because we did have classes on the end time. Of course, one of the great creators of a lot of dispensationalism is John Nelson Darby. I believe he's also a key player in one of the ones who had come up with the idea of the rapture. another bad false doctrine, another one that we probably have to do a session on as well.
And the thing with Darby is that he kind of figured out the time frame. He just misplaced the 7-year tribulation.
Mm-hmm.
He saw the 7-year tribulation as a future event. However, while studying on the 7-year tribulation, he saw this little horn fit in that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually saw the same thing that we saw. It's just that he has, once again, these guys place this, especially Darby here, placed this in a futuristic event.
Yeah, and of course, Schofield, he just continued going on promoting Darby's perspective on this, that the Antichrist would come out and be a figure in the, quote, last days, a futuristic perspective of that.
So both of these guys were very much last days, in time, and began to define Antichrist as this last days, which that's what John said. Yeah, that we were in the last days. So, but John's last days and our last days seem to have gotten parted a little bit.
Yeah, 2,000 years difference there.
Exactly.
And Hal Lindsey, that's a name that was a household name for sure for me growing up. And I think he was the one who kind of painted the picture of this individual person as a sort of world leader, and he being a very charismatic person, and that's from Hal Lindsey. I think in this Left Behind series, I remember the picture of this Antichrist was, a very handsome man, very charismatic. People he was just a magnetic personality.
No wonder people think I'm the Antichrist.
Except he could do miracle signs and wonders. What about you?
So we have these guys, and then the preterists also take a position on this, and some historical scholars actually who study the scriptures from a historical point of view. And we have a Jesuit scholar, Louis de Alcazar, taught about the little horn and into a historic perspective of Antiochus IV, Epiphanes. That's not what that says at all. It's Epiphanes. Epiphanes. I just say it real fast. Epiphanes. And this was who desecrated the Jewish temple. So he saw this person to be the little horn because of the particular desecration of the Jewish temple. And who else do we have here?
I remember reading about this guy, Albert Barnes. He was one of the big voices, or is one of the big voices in the preterist understanding of that. And he as well saw this Antichrist as one of the guys in Daniel. But he also, again, there's also this connection to Rome.
Yeah.
So, you have a person, and then you also have a whole nation, a whole kingdom that's being discussed here as well.
And then we have a couple of more of these guys, but the one that caught my attention was, which you've mentioned this, Tim LaHaye, the entire Left Behind series. And there's a Gleason Archer, which emphasizes the same thing about Rome. And then Edward Young, of course, was somebody that I was familiar with. And in the amillennial view, identified the little horn with historical figures, but seeing its ultimate fulfillment in eschatological terms. So it was all of these guys saw it as a future event, except for the first ones, like Martin Luther and those guys. They directly pointed the finger at the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
So the term Antichrist has been used to really categorize a lot of people. And gosh, how many times have I heard people talk about certain individuals and individual denominations as Antichrist?
Mm.
So that's definitely. So we went through those basically to let you know why this is important that we go through this. This is one of the legs of the table that they use to support this unfounded doctrine in 1 John about the Antichrist. And we're kind of coming in the back door of this, like I normally do with everything. But as we've stated, we've already taught two of the doctrines that are used to support the Antichrist. Now let's look at them just a moment before we go on to the little horn, because it's one of the main ones that is taught to be supportive of this. And why are we teaching on this? Because the 1,000-year reign and the 70 weeks of Daniel do teach on these subjects.
Mm-hmm.
But they are taught in a completely separate framework. So what you're going to see is that all 8 legs of this table are not supporting a doctrine of Antichrist. It's supporting the doctrines of the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
The Christ. So they use statements about the Christ to try to affirm the Antichrist. And first off, he's not a person, right?
Right.
And now not all of them are talking about the Christ, but they are events associated with either talking about the Christ, which when we went into the abomination which maketh desolate standing in the holy place, that's talking about the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And we just have to refer you back to whichever one says the abomination of desolation on it, 1,000-year reign. I don't know which number it was. And then the other one was the man of sin and lawless man.
Now, Michael, the one thing I'd like to point out about the man of sin or lawlessness or the son of perdition is the 2 Thessalonians, which is where that one is found. And like I said, also in the story of Judas Iscariot in John 17. But in the 2 Thessalonians segment, though I think we can read through that and see Jesus in that, we have to remind you that that is been concluded as pseudographical writing.
Yes.
And so when you come to that, now what we found about pseudographical writing is it's quite possible that the Apostle Paul did have a teaching about the man of sin that's included in that 2 Thessalonians, but the context and everything of it shows that it was pseudographical writing.
Yes.
So someone could have taken a teaching of the Apostle Paul and included it in that particular writing. So you might be able to find some truth in it, but to really rely on it as being a true, genuine piece of writing from the Apostle Paul, we have concluded you just can't do that in 2 Thessalonians.
Excellent point. So, and let me say just a little bit more about the pseudographical. And when Daniel and I did all of this, we did not have AI. We had he and I. And so he and I, we did a lot of quite laborious comparative teaching or comparative reading, and on subject level, on the Greek words that were used, and then suddenly not used, and translation, and we went into all that. So then after we did all that work, so like just Ephesians, so I go in and I'm talking to our artificial intelligence, and I'm telling them, okay, so this is what we've considered, that chapters 1, 2, and 3 were written by Paul, and 4, 5, and 6 of Ephesians was written by another author. Is there a reason to think that? And I would say it took 1 second before it started typing out the answer. And it starts coming out with, well, yes, the sentences and all of the sentence structures in 1, 2, and 3 are shorter than the sentence structures from 4, 5, and 6. We didn't even think about sentence structure.
Right.
And also the Greek words used here are different than the Greek words used there. It's stylistically, it's different. As far as teaching, it is not the same.
Right.
One teaches on this, the other teaches on that. So it's like I'm beginning to see that I'm going to be completely unnecessary in the future. And then I also ran through, so AI found out on its own by us asking it the question that the book of Ephesians is not written by, and now it was open-minded enough to say it either was a different author or written very many years later by the same author.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way it's the same letter.
Right.
And so they were gracious enough to give that a possible thought. Then I ran through.
If I can remind you, Michael, when you and I had that discussion about that, I remember you saying that exact same thing. You said, and this was before you had the influence of the AI, I remember you telling me once, you said, and I think it was when we were going through 1 Corinthians, you said, this is just a cranky old man. Yeah. And that was one of the things that we looked at was this Paul just in his later years, gone senile and gone wild?
Well, we have a little bit of precedent for that. We have the writer of Proverbs telling us exactly how things go. And if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get beat.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I spoke too. And, harlots get what harlots deserve, and good men get what good men deserve. And it's always this way. Nothing ever happens out of line of this great wisdom. And then you got the same guy writing the very next book. And he says, vanity, vanity, all's vanity. I've watched the righteous go without food, and I've watched the wicked have everything they want. So we had precedent for this late life change. I'm glad I've gotten nicer about but we did look at that. And it's funny that AI also looked at that possibility also. So, but as I presented this this possible structure to AI about 1 Corinthians, and I just asked it about these chapters and where is it. Where is their continuity, and where does the continuity get broken off? Where does it begin again? Is it all one author? And I will be doggedy dog. It came up with chapters 1, 2, and 3 are very much the same subject, beginning in chapter 4 through 14. The emphasis is completely different. But ironically, it looks as though chapter 15 picks up where chapter 3 left off. And it's like, are you kidding me? You mean I didn't have to study at all? But we're also wanting you to be introduced and my goodness, start using. It's like I've told people about studying ancestry. I spent 20 years researching my ancestry and have, man, I've found out great things. I've gone slow because I've wanted to see the documents and to be able to affirm that what I was finding was true. I don't know that all of it's true. I'm still, I mean, anytime you're researching anything, you have to hold out the possibility that there's something wrong with your research. But then all of a sudden AI comes along and I start doing, I do on occasion, I've done family trees for people. I did Daniel's. I haven't looked back at Daniel's to see what AI has come up with, but now if I would have started my research that took me 20 years, if I would have started that in 2023, it would already have produced all of the information that took me 20 years to produce.
Wow.
And I don't like that. So I'm like my aunt and uncle about the telephone. It would ring and they'd all run to the other room. I mean, it's like, I'm not answering it. So yeah, my relatives were hillbillies. They were afraid of the telephone. But anyway, so we had reason to give credibility possibly to a later writing. But then when it came to 1 Corinthians, and it has an insertion of 10 chapters that are completely different than 1 through 3, and then the end of 3 picks up according to examination by artificial intelligence, says that chapter 15 is the natural beginning of the rest of 1, 2, and 3. So I just wanted to throw that in because the research that we did was so unique. Our research on pseudegraphical writings, they have been talked about, but we think we're the only ones that stuck our neck out and said, this is and this is not. And these are the reasons why.
Yeah, right. Let's just, for argument's sake, Michael, just examine a couple verses here in 2 Thessalonians and see if this man of sin could be Christ. 2 Thessalonians 2:3, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped. And he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, Michael, if that doesn't sound like Jesus, I don't know what does. I mean, because he came into this religious world and showed them everything that they thought about God was wrong, and he opposed it. And everything that they worshipped. I mean, he went in the temple and threw over the tables.
Yeah,
and then he sat in the temple. Remember when he sat in the temple and he read from Isaiah, and he said, these words are manifest before you right this day.
Yeah.
And he showed himself that he was God.
Yeah.
Pretty clear.
It happened, and that is a true story. And Daniel, I don't think I've told you this. I was reading that statement that day's not going to happen except there become a great falling away first.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what Jesus said to his disciples right before he went to the cross?
What was that?
You're all going to fall away.
That sounds like another episode we got coming up. The great falling away.
The great falling away. And the great falling away happened. It's called the disciples. Now, what then arises after that great falling away, was there any recovery for them to pick up and understand the gospel from there? But I really am convinced that the great falling away, because this was supposed to be during right at the middle of the last 7 years of Daniel's prophecy. This great falling away was to happen after 3.5 years of the first part of the tribulation period. And it happens to fall exactly when Jesus looked at the disciples and said, you are all, every one of you are going to use, and he used that term, all away.
And it happened just as the abomination of desolation was made manifest in the holy place.
Yeah.
Standing in the holy place.
Yeah. And we explained why in the world would the term abomination be used, referring to our sweet Jesus, baby Jesus. You know, we can't separate the sweet baby Jesus from these terms, but we do know that Jesus, that knew no sin, was made sin, that we might be made righteousness of God. So these terms are all the same. It just depends on which book you're looking in. Man of sin, the lawlessness, all of these things. They're just depending upon which book you're looking at and which translation. And then, of course, I remember when it slapped me right in the face, and it has only been just within the last 2 months that I was reading that, and suddenly I realized, like, oh my God! And I got out my Bible and I typed in into the research on my Power Bible about human sacrifice, and that's when I went back, and God Himself said it is an abomination to use a human sacrifice.
Wow!
And it's like, why in the world? And that is the reason. We've been taught the baby Jesus so much that these terms about the baby Jesus is just unacceptable. How dare you call the baby Jesus the man of sin? How dare you call him the abomination that standeth in the holy place? But the powerful thing about that abomination is that he maketh desolate. And Paul's whole ministry is about what he made desolate.
And that's what the whole prophecy of Daniel 9 is the end of sin and the end of iniquity, that would all be made desolate.
The desolation is there in Daniel 9. So Daniel, let's read Daniel.
Let's read Daniel.
Let's read that verse. We just need that 9. What is it? 9:25. We want to read you the desolation that was brought about by the abomination.
70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish transgression, to make an end of sin, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy.
Wow. And that's to seal up the vision and the prophecy. So the prophecy got sealed up as soon as sin was dealt with, which the next thing that was coming along in this prophecy was 3.5 years of great tribulation in which no flesh would be saved.
Yeah.
And then Jesus comes in and says, put a hold on everything. Here we are. Now is the judgment of this world. Well, who are you, Mr. Jesus? Right. The prophet Daniel said that we were now due for 3.5 years of great tribulation in which no flesh would be saved. But that's what Jesus drew unto himself. I can't read that verse anymore in John 12, I think it's 37, where he said, now is the judgment of this world. And I can't help but read it this way. Now is the great tribulation.
Yeah.
Because that was the judgment of the world. It was the great tribulation was the judgment of the whole world.
Michael, here in Daniel is where Christianity and those who teach a future return of Christ, a future millennial reign, a future Antichrist, is they come into here starting in chapter 7, and they start seeing these individual kings and men that are mentioned and start describing who they are going to be in the future. As opposed to what we are saying is that these are all people that had a history, that they were already here, done. This is a piece of history. This prophecy has been fulfilled. and completed. I'll just read here a few verses, and this is where we get the little horn. We start seeing the beast and different images like that. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, it was raised up on a side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And then they said to us, Arise, devour much flesh. And after that I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night vision, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking into pieces, and trampling the residue in its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. As I was considering the horns, there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in the horn were eyes, like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words.
So the first thing that you know is going to be our go-to, and we always have to proof every one of these to see whether or not our framework is accurate to apply to this, because we are prepared at any point to say, put on the brakes.
Mm-hmm.
We've been wrong about all of this big chunk of information because we were using these parameters to do the research in. Now we found out that these parameters are incorrect, then we have to readjust everything within a certain degree. So our disposition then, of course, is that this is a historical event because it all fits within the 70 weeks of Daniel. Right? All right. So now, historically, when we apply historical content to what you just described, what do we get historically from that if this was historical? We've got specific numbers of things and leading down to a person. Unlike the Antichrist, this is a real person. But because the Antichrist, they want to define the Antichrist as a person, they define him as the little horn here. And that's where we get all of these extra definitions about Antichrist is out of these doctrines that are supposed to be about the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm. So, for instance, Michael, in the fact that there are 4 beasts, we know historically speaking, there were 4 kingdoms, empires, whatever you want to call them, that were crucial in the history of the Bible story as it relates to the 70 weeks of Daniel and the last portion of the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And that would be Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And so you see that these are all...
Those were actual physical kingdoms in this time period.
Exactly. Yep.
Ending in the last kingdom being the kingdom that was in existence when Christ was born.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and then you have 10 different kings that were raised up. And then you have this 11th king, this little horn that arises that seems to be different than all the others. So this little horn is a king that blasphemes and persecutes all of the saints. That's what it's described here in Daniel chapter 7.
So these 10, do we have any historical context for these 10 who would have been within, if we track with this would have been 10 within the Roman Empire. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's from what I understand, because that 10 would have been that last beast that arose that was different than all the other ones, and that there were 10. So, Michael, that brings up the question about who could these 10 horns be? And maybe the question to ask ahead of that is, biblically speaking, what does a horn represent?
Well, of course, this throws us in uncharted territory as far as most Bible scholars are concerned. However, we have found there are a handful of not very famous scholars who did follow this train of thought that we are going to take people down right now. So we're not the only ones. We like being the only ones. But in this case, we are not the only ones to make this observation. And this came from other people who conceived or perceived that the cross was the end of prophecy. So it's people who thought in that concept. And of course, if you believe that, well, what Jesus said, that he came to fulfill all law and prophecy, you have to. You don't have a choice. It just blows me away, Daniel, that everybody that says Jesus is Lord don't like to listen to Jesus.
Right.
Jesus said he fulfilled all prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus said, if you want to know about me, go study the Hebrew Scriptures.
Yeah.
That's two things that people who say they believe in Jesus don't do. And they do not accept. They just do not accept the fulfillment of prophecy. That's what makes you a Christian.
Right.
One of the things that makes you a Christian is unfulfilled prophecy. It's what turned me into a Christian, because somebody showed me in one of the books I showed Daniel the other day. We found it, and it says they in those days the chariots shall run in the streets like lightning, and they shall jostle one against another. And they showed me that at the Children of God headquarters in Tampa when I was 18 years old. And they told me that it's prophecy of the car. And I was like, oh my God. So prophecy was the big hook for me. I just was fascinated by prophecy. But they didn't tell me that Jesus said he fulfilled all prophecy. And they also didn't tell me that Jesus said to go search the Scriptures, because that's where we'd find out about him.
So whoever these 10 horns are, based on Jesus' criteria for prophecy, because Daniel is a book of prophecy, is we are required then by the criteria Jesus has set to see them as historical figures and not futuristic people.
After the cross, you cannot read any of this as some possible future event. It is the curse that is upon Christianity, is they refuse the directives. There's two things that have Christianity under a curse of false perception and doctrine. And that is that they do not accept that Jesus fulfilled all prophecy, and they do not accept that the place that you need to be researching is in the Hebrew Scriptures. They just do not accept that. So it leaves open to all this. So what we're doing is swimming through 2024 years of not receiving people that have come up with ideas that are not within the perimeter of what Jesus said was viable.
Yeah, because they put into characters here, Russia, and you don't see Russia in the Bible.
No. I mean,
you get all kinds of people that come in. I mean, even about the Antichrist. I mean, how many popes have been
events? Yeah.
How many popes have been accused of being the Antichrist?
Oh, everybody that doesn't agree with you is the Antichrist, right?
Right.
I've certainly been accused of being the Antichrist. That is for sure. I am the most likely suspect out there with all these descriptions. So what is the horn? Biblically, we learn that is always a reference to some authority. It doesn't mean spiritual. It doesn't mean political. It doesn't mean family. It just means authority. You have to take the term horn and apply it to whatever the subject is. But it does mean an authority. Like Jesus was the horn of salvation.
Sure.
So the word horn in that case lets us know who the top dog is in where salvation is concerned. He's not the to-do-to-do. He's the authority, right? Mm-hmm. I've never heard a horn sound that way. But
I think I did in middle school.
I think I had one like that too. I think it was before middle school, though, hopefully. Anyway, so what we are doing is taking the instructions that we were given by the Christ, that number one, this has to be fulfilled. And number two, we're searching the Hebrew scriptures, and we are letting all this fit within that. So far, we've batted 1,000 as people who don't know anything about baseball, I guess, say. I mean, we're field goaling 1,000,000. I don't know. I come up with my own. And for all of our sports fans out there, we just lost supporters.
They were going to call in and make a pledge too.
I know. They had the phone in their hand. They just hung up. That is the criteria that we are, of course, going to look at this. Now, if we look historically, Daniel, it looks as though that there's different lists, of course. And it would take a lot of time for us to go in and define that there were 10 authorities. Were there 10 authorities during the Roman Empire from its inception? Yes, there was.
Yeah, at the very least. Yeah.
Up to the cross. And 10 could have been called horns because they carried quite a bit of authority during their reign. Some would not have been considered as horns, I'm sure. But we do have 10 that it's not even necessary that we name them out for you. If you want to find out, go ask AI. What are the 10 authorities that would have ruled Rome up until Jesus' time? So what you're going to find out is that Herod the Great is one of those listed. So, but we got a problem with Herod the Great being the little horn that persecuted. He did persecute, right? So, like, he had all the children killed.
Yeah.
And then we have Herod that is judging Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Herod was all his lifetime a very bad man. But wait a minute. Is that Herod the same Herod? The Herod that judged Jesus? Is he the same Herod that tried to have Jesus killed because of the prophecies, according to the book of Matthew? Daniel, do you have a clue?
I always thought Herod was Herod.
That's what I thought. Let's look at the story of Herod. I know they called him Herod the Great.
Whoa.
So that means he'd have been a big horn, though, right?
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. This is interesting. So you had Herod. He put out this plan to kill all of those who were 2 years and younger.
We remember that story. Well,
so the angel came to Joseph and said, "Get out of here, go to Egypt." But Matthew 2:19, Michael. Now, when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Arise, take the young child and his mother, and go back to the land of Israel."
Wow. So Herod the Great, let's call him the big horn. He certainly wouldn't have qualified as a little horn. by any means.
No.
But he did have a role in this end time prophecy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's even recorded, Rachel weeping for her children. And that's always considered to be this great, horrible thing that Herod did in killing all of the firstborn.
Yeah.
He was very terrified of his power being taken from him. We know from history that he even had one of his own sons killed because of suspicions of him undermining his authority. So who is this guy? Wait, we've got Herod. Do we not have Herod judging Jesus?
Yeah.
How could he do that 30 years after he's dead?
Yeah, that's Luke 23:6. And when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him, Jesus, to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time.
Wow. But Herod's dead. Oh, wow. You see, none of this stuff is reliable at all.
There must be another Herod.
Well, let's see what history tells us. According to history, after Herod died, his son took over. He was not nearly as great of a ruler. In fact, he's noted for he was noted for being extremely cruel and things like that. But he was nowhere near as great as his father. But that would be an 11th ruler in Rome.
Wow.
What did that prophecy say in Daniel?
I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there, in this horn, were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words.
I think Herod's son was kind of known for those characteristics. And in fact, one of the things that he wanted to do in calling Jesus before him was that he was wanting to see a miracle. And after he didn't see a miracle, they had Jesus robed and mocked and sent him back to Pilate. So while we have here a historical lineage of the book of Daniel down to an 11th character, the fact that Little Herod, that's the only thing you can call him is Little Herod, because if his father was Herod the Great, what do you call his son? He's Little Herod, right?
Yeah.
So, but he was involved, but the final decision was made by Pilate.
Right.
So, how do we determine the little horn here? Let us tell you one thing that this little horn ain't. This little horn has nothing to do with 1 John and 2 John.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely nothing. Now, where this throws us is back into the last part of the 1,000-year reign, and it throws us into the very last part of the 70th week of Daniel, which only the last 7 weeks of the prophecy only lasted 3.5 years, because as we explained to you in the last one, Paul affirms it, Jesus affirms it, the prophecy affirms it. The last 3.5 years got cut off. Because if it hadn't been cut off, there wouldn't be a human race left.
Yeah, Michael, listen here to Daniel 7 and verse 9. So I had read through verse 8, which is about the little horn. But listen to verse 9. I watched until thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow. The hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire.
So while all of these kings were being seated during the 1,000-year reign, there's a big king on fiery wheels. That's what you call Hot Wheels, right?
Yep.
But there was only one Hot Wheels, and that Hot Wheels was Christ.
Mm.
And he was ruling on his Hot Wheels above all of the kings that were placed during the 1,000-year reign.
Mm. I just love how that's worded. I watched till thrones were put into place. Which thrones? The 4 beasts, the 10 crowns, all of the 10 horns. All of these had a place.
Yeah.
A predestined place.
Yeah.
And I watched as each one, Daniel watched as each one prophetically took their place in the 1,000-year reign. How do we know it was a 1,000-year reign? Because the Christ, the Ancient of Days, was seated at the right hand till all his enemies were made a footstool. So, Michael, this tells me a couple things that, number one, whoever these kings are, whoever the 4 beasts are, whoever they are, number one, they're predestined.
Yeah.
They're predestined to be in that place at the time of the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And so this has to be, as we have up to this point, shown that the 1,000-year reign of Christ is a historical period of time, not a futuristic event, which means whoever or whatever the 10 horns are and the 4 beasts are, whoever they are, they have to be historical figures.
Yes.
During the 1,000-year reign of Christ.
And that would include this final little horn.
Yes.
Which as Daniel and I were studying this, now I'm going to be just very honest with you about a guy that has a doctorate. And he didn't know that the Herod that was in the part of the massacre was not the same Herod at the crucifixion. But I have to admit, I didn't either.
You have a doctorate too.
I know. I'm trying to hide that because, goodness, mine was bestowed. I did not work for it. Mine came by grace. Yours came by law.
And we must have subconsciously had to known it because we read the story. Herod was dead, so they returned, but just never put those thoughts together.
I had no clue there were 2 Herods.
Yeah.
Now, we may be exposing ourselves. I mean, some Bible scholars that might listen to us may be just laughing their asses off at us right now. But I honestly never considered it. I didn't need to know.
Mm-hmm.
But when we did this research, it became time to know.
Yeah.
And we needed to check how many authorities were there in Rome. Is this within the realm of historical probability? And lo and behold, here it is. And then we have this 11th coming, and in the out of this horn of structure. The only thing that would cause us to say that it is Herod instead of Pontius Pilate would be, well, you would also call Pontius Pilate a horn, but he would not be a 11th horn.
Yeah.
And Herod, the son of Herod, would be an 11th horn. Now, we don't know. We've not tried to trace back from Pontius Pilate backward to see if there's any number of 10s before him. But we do know that before Herod, the son of Herod, there are 10 established authorities over Rome. And this Herod only ruled for his entire reign was the thing that was the middle of his reign was the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Jesus dying on the cross.
Mm-mm-mm. So interesting.
Yeah. So, Daniel, I like your observation there that we don't need to make a big whoop-de-doo about this. Uh, we do need to make a big whoop-de-did because it already did. This happened.
Mm-hmm.
Can we? I am sure there are those guys of you out there that are more brilliant than Daniel and I that can get into this, and you can figure out exactly who that 11th little horn is. But what we have done is show you the historical structure that contains exactly what the book of Daniel has to say.
Yeah.
And the most important thing, as Daniel has pointed out, is that over all of these was ruling the Ancient of Days.
Yeah. I think it's safe to conclude, Michael, that whoever, well, not even that, because we started off showing that the table, the Antichrist, even the table itself is a figment of imagination.
Yeah.
Because that term Antichrist is taken out of First John when it's not talking about an individual. Right. In the context of what John was saying, it was anybody who declared that Jesus did not come in the flesh.
Yeah.
That is the Antichrist. So now if we just look to see, okay, well, what about the beast? Well, what about the horn? Well, if we take away the imagery that we were given about who the Antichrist is going to be in Christian terms, okay. This Antichrist is going to be someone who's going to rule. Okay, and now we know that these beasts and these horns are rulers. So perhaps there is an individual person that is has a part to play. But regardless of who that person is, we understand, according to the prophecy, not only the prophecy itself, Daniel, but also according to the words of Christ, is that this person, these individuals, these 10 horns, these kings, these rulers, these emperors, whoever they are a part of history. And it's not a person that's going to rise up. It's not the next president or the next dictator or the next this or next that. It is somebody who is already long gone and dead.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can say more than 2,000 years.
Yes.
Long gone and dead. Mm-hmm. So we have now dismantled 3 of the 8 legs that support the false assumption of a individual Antichrist. You see that these prophecies turn to an individual.
Yeah.
But these prophecies are not about Antichrist. These prophecies were assigned and put in as legs under this fictitious table of a single man called the Antichrist.
Yeah, and Michael, as we even look at some of these other terms, like Daniel, one of the other ones in the list is the King of the North. Once again, this would be a character within the book of Daniel, within the prophecy of Daniel. So whoever the King of the North is, he is one that would also be a part of history. Yes. The one prophesied in Zechariah, the worthless shepherd, he would be an individual that would be somebody who would have been in prophecy. And so that would be a fulfillment. Daniel 9:26, I think that's one that's misinterpreted. The prince who is to come. I've understood that to be speaking of Christ, because that's what that whole 70 weeks is prophesying about. But the prince who is to come, whether it's Christ or anybody else, it's a done deal. It's a historical fact. The beast, we just looked at the beast, the false prophet. These are all individuals that were a part of prophetic history. And that has been something that has been manifest. So, boom, Michael, just like that, I took out 4 more legs.
You sure did. So, but we're going to have too much fun dismantling this thing. And I think you can see where this is going, folks. Now, will our template hold up? as true. Will the other 4 be as definitively clear as to having nothing to do with the Antichrist, but that who it is about is identifiable within a historical realm?
Right.
So we've got 4 more to look at. And because the one that Daniel just shared, we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. But this support system for this term Antichrist is crumbling. You now have, if you got 4 legs on one side and 4 legs on the other, you got one side of the table that's on the ground. One could say it's coming down. And we will not rest until we find out, do we need to put these? But see, the one thing that we can't do is go back and put these 4 supports back under this issue of the Antichrist, because we know that these have nothing to do. So then if these other 4 turn out to be supportive of an individual person called the Antichrist, we're going to have to switch it to a 4-legged table and make it all work. But that would take a whole lot of doing. We'd have to cut the table in half. I mean, Jesus was a carpenter, but come on, this is getting ridiculous. Folks, this is just a lot of fun. Daniel and I have had a wonderful time going through this. This is the 1,000-year reign of Christ, the understanding of the little horn spoken of by Daniel.
And so it is, we must leave you, family and friends. If you'd like to know anything about the Gospel Revolution, or you want to call in and correct us, then call us on
832-318-9339.
Or go to www.gospelrevolution.com and hit the connect link. You can find us on your favorite social media network, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Please be sure to hit that subscribe, share, and like button on whatever platform you are listening. Now it's good night from Daniel Rouse in the frozen tundra.
And it's good night from Michael Williams right here in Clarksville, Tennessee. I have my sweet daughter and my sweet little grandson visiting this weekend. I think I just heard them up and about. So
we sure hope that you enjoyed today's Powercast. And remember, we'll be here to do the same thing all over again next week, only
better.
Since you're knocking on the door, you're begging to come in, yeah. Unaware that all the while love's been knocking from within. You are the love you seek, a perfect yet unique, righteous, holy. Yeah. When you feel lost and alone, staring at the unknown, and these words be the compass that guides you right home. We are one, we are love, we are. Know where you gotta be, nothing to complete. It's not a thing that you need, you're the love. Just remember to breathe and take a second off. Look, I'm just trying to remind you that you're perfectly divine, flawlessly designed. When you feel lost and alone, staring at the unknown, let these words be the compass.
Deconstructing religion and barbecuing the sacred cows of Christianity before your very eyes. You are listening to
The Gospel Revolution.